Welcome, Greek U Nation, to episode number 227 of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Eilon, CEO of Greek University. I'm a speaker and a two-time author. Our second book, From Letters to Leaders, Redefining New Member Education and Leveraging Belonging to Eliminate Hazing, is available now, so go and pick up that book on Amazon today. We call these episodes the Fraternity Foodie Podcast because there is nothing like great food to bring college students together. Fun fact, recently at the Oscars, Will Smith won Best Actor for King Richard. Will Smith was portraying Richard Williams, the father of his two daughters, Venus and Serena. And, Richard was determined to write his daughters into the history books on tennis courts in Compton, California. And Will Smith, when he received that acceptance award, he said, "Life often imitates art." And since our next guest wrote the book on the Williams sisters, I wonder if he thinks Richard Williams would have done the same thing that Will Smith did to defend his family and his family's honor as well. So Cecil Harris, he is a sports journalist. He has covered major tennis events, including the US Open and the Women's Tennis Association Championships in New York. He has written for the New York Times, the Associated Press, and USA Today. He's also the author of several books, including Charging the Net, A History of Blacks in Tennis, from Althea Gibson and Arthur Ashe to the Williams sisters, and also the book called Different Strokes, Serena, Venus, and the Unfinished Black Tennis Revolution. Welcome to the show, Cecil Harris.
Thank you, Mike. It's great to be on with you.
Oh man, I tell you, it's an honor to be talking to you today as a New Yorker myself. I love your work. I just think it's absolutely incredible. And I, saw the Oscars last night and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is great. I'm going to have Cecil on the show. I mean, this is really, really great. So anyway, timing is everything in the business. And I know you know that more than anybody knows.
Yes. Yes.
So, all right. So you decided on Fordham University for your undergraduate experience. Why was Fordham the right choice for you?
Well, I knew that I wanted to become a sports journalist, and I did some homework, and I found out that a great number of sports journalists have come out of Fordham University. Vin Scully, who was the longtime voice of the Dodgers, retired a few years ago, Fordham graduate. Mike Breen, who does the NBA games on ESPN and ABC, Fordham graduate. And Marty Glickman, who was the voice of the Giants, the Knicks, the Rangers, and a mentor to many up-and-coming sportscasters. He taught at Fordham University. So that was enough for me. And when I graduated from Fordham with my degree in media studies, a few years later, I became a beat writer for the Yankees. And at that time, this was in the mid-90s, 4 of the 8 beat writers covering the Yankees were Fordham graduates. Wow, so I made the right choice.
You definitely made the right choice. And I know that we like all the same teams in terms of the Yankees, the Rangers, the Knicks. I mean, just all of them. You could just go to the Giants. You go down the list. I mean, we see eye to eye in terms of sports. I am sure of that.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk about tennis. I mean, you've written 2 books on tennis specifically. Yeah. So how have the Williams sisters revolutionized tennis and inspired generations of female tennis players?
Well, it's interesting that Venus is 15 months older than Serena. They both turned pro at 14. And once they got their sea legs, they really revolutionized the sport by making it faster, quicker, harder hitting, and more athletic than it had ever been. With no offense to Chris Evert and Martina Navratilova, who are 2 of the all-time greats, if you were to go on YouTube and watch video of Chris versus Martina in, say, the 70s or 80s, it looks like they're playing in slow motion compared to what we see today. The Williams sisters made it more of an athletic game, more of a power game, and they also changed the look of tennis fashion. If you notice, Serena and Venus design their own clothes. They don't wear whatever the sportswear manufacturer gives them. So they put their personalities into what they wear on court. And when other athletes have that kind of influence, they do the same thing. Naomi Osaka, who grew up idolizing Serena, now designs her own fashion. And I think Coco Gauff, the up-and-coming 18-year-old from Florida, once she wins a major title, I think she'll be able to break out of the pack and work with designers and design her own fashions. The Williams sisters really brought that to the women's game. So not only the way the game is played, but the way the game looks. And Venus and Serena have influenced two generations of female athletes to want to play the sport. They know they have to play it in a style similar to the Williams sisters, hard hitting, fast, quick, athletic. And they've really done so much to change the game.
Yeah, I completely agree. I remember I'm also a tennis fan, and the first time I saw the Williams sisters play on TV, I was like, I've never seen this before. I was like, the pace in terms of
Yes.
how they're playing, this doesn't exist. I mean, they
Yeah.
totally revolutionized the game.
Yeah,
Uh,
I can tell you one anecdote. In 2002, I went to Wimbledon because I was curious to see how the British fans at the most prestigious tournament in the world would react to the Williams sisters. And Venus and Serena, they made it to the final. Serena beat Venus in the final. But in that journey along the way, when Venus or Serena was playing, they were hitting the ball so consistently hard with power and precision. I was hearing gasping, oohs and ahs from the crowd. This is something that they had never seen before from women's tennis.
yeah. You're 100% right. I mean, when you see that power, you're like, oh my God. I mean, this is just unique. I mean, it's just never been done before that way. And so you're absolutely right. And, we have to talk about King Richard, this movie.
Yes.
Will Smith said that, life often imitates art. And, he went up and he slapped Chris Rock across the face for, a bad joke that Chris Rock told. But I'm just wondering, do you think that Richard Williams, in the same type of situation, do you think he would have reacted in a similar fashion as Will Smith did when somebody went to attack essentially his family and make a comment about his family?
I think Richard would have reacted that way. Fortunately, there's no example of Richard doing that to anyone, but I know that he is extremely protective of his children, his wife, although they divorced 20 years ago. But King Richard depicts them in 1994 when they were happily married. I think Richard would have done whatever he could if he thought a family member was in danger. He took very seriously the role of protector, head of the household. And I can recall the 1997 US Open semifinals when Venus was deliberately bumped by a Romanian player, Arena Spurlea. It didn't get physical, but Richard was quick to say after the match that Spurlea was, in his words, a big, tall white turkey. He went after her verbally because Spurlea did bump Venus in an attempt to physically intimidate her.
Mhm.
And Richard is a big man. Will Smith is a big man, well over 6 feet tall. Part of the strength of Will Smith's performance that won him the Oscar is how well he embodied Richard Williams in size and voice inflections, mannerisms, and steely determination. He's rejected by Vic Braden, who was a prominent tennis coach. Richard didn't give up. He kept looking for someone who would believe in his daughters as much as he did. And he was very adamant about what they would be able to do, what they would not be able to do. And he had that plan, take them out of regular school, have them homeschooled by their mom. Basically, they have each other to rely on, take them out of junior tennis, which was not the usual route to tennis stardom. Venus turns pro at 14, Serena turns pro at 14, and they're playing grown women, not playing these junior tournaments where there's often favoritism, nepotism, cronyism. Richard was very strong about his views of what it would take for his daughters to make it. So, Mike, I have no doubt that if he really believed a member of his family was being threatened, that he might have reacted physically. And Will Smith apologized for it. I think Richard may have been cut from the same cloth, or the other way around.
Right. Oh, so interesting to me, man. We
Yeah.
could talk about that forever. But the other point is about the books. I mean, despite their success, why do you think that top Black players are still so underrepresented in the world of tennis?
Well, in the case of Black males, they have so many more options. In different strokes, I talked to Black players such as Michael Young, who was a highly sought after 15-year-old player. And basically, he made the point that boys look at basketball, football, boxing, track and field, now mixed martial arts. They have so many other options. And so they're not as quick to look at tennis. a sport that doesn't promise immediate riches. I mean, if you're really good at basketball, you can go from high school 1 year in college to the NBA. Uh, Boxing, track and field, it doesn't take quite as long. The NFL, 3 years on a college campus, then you're eligible for the NFL draft. And I'm sorry, I meant Donald Young. I misspoke. And he just made the point that for Black boys, they look at sports where Black men are making it, and because they don't see prominent Black tennis stars, it's not as easy for them to visualize themselves doing it. But for Black girls, it's a different dynamic. Tennis is the highest paying sport for women by far. Equal prize money for women at each of the 4 major tournaments. And they see Venus, they see Serena, they now see Naomi Osaka, they now see Coco Gauff, they see Sloane Stephens and Madison Keys. So it's a different dynamic for the girls than it is for the boys.
Fascinating. And it makes a lot of sense what it is that you're saying. And, you talk about this underreported scandal of why no African-American umpire has officiated a U.S. Open men's or women's final since 1993. Tell us about this scandal.
It is mind-boggling that this has happened. Sandy French is the first and only Black American umpire to officiate a U.S. Open singles final. She worked the women's final in 1993 without incident. By all accounts, she did a fine job. But the next year, she showed up and she was demoted from the chair umpire, the one who sits in the big high chair, to the line umpire. And she asked, "Why am I being demoted?" And she was told, "Well, you didn't deserve to work that final last year." I mean, the exact opposite of what you would expect to hear. That 93 final should have been a springboard for Sandy French to go on to work major finals all over the world. Instead, she was demoted. A similar thing happened to a Black male umpire, Cecil Harris, who was an attorney. He wanted to get into tennis. He found out you have to be sponsored by your country's federation. You have to go to an umpire school. The highest level of officiating is the gold badge. He was the first Black umpire to earn the gold badge, but he was still never allowed to work a U.S. Open singles final. So Sandy French and Cecil Harris filed a racial discrimination suit against the USTA. Unfortunately for them, it was settled out of court. They had to sign a non-disclosure agreement, basically to go away. A decade later, Tony Nimmons, another Black American umpire, had worked his way up to the silver badge, next to the highest level. He worked many U.S. Open doubles finals, but never got the opportunity to work a singles final. And he ended up filing a racial discrimination lawsuit because, as he told me, I write about him in Different Strokes, other umpires came to him and said, "Tony, this should have been your final," but he wasn't getting the opportunity. And now his case is sort of tied up in legal wrangling. It hasn't gone to trial. And Tony Nimmons told me that the USTA general counsel said to him, "What we do when someone files a lawsuit against us is drown them in paperwork until they're willing to accept pennies on the dollar to go away." So that is clearly the USTA strategy. And we're no closer now, almost 30 years later, to seeing a Black American umpire officiate a US Open final. And it's, again, an underreported scandal because tennis's American TV partners, ESPN and Tennis Channel, never talk about it.
I never knew anything about it. It wasn't until you were talking about it that I even knew that a scandal exists. And it really, it reminds me an awful lot of KBJ and getting onto the Supreme Court now and her nomination, because you think about all of the Black women, the Black men over the years that were extraordinarily qualified to have that role on the Supreme Court, but they never got a shot at it. And so it's the same kind of dynamic that we're seeing here with this particular scandal.
Yes, so true. Ketanji Brown Jackson has gone before confirmation committees before and been overwhelmingly approved. But this time it turned into a political circus with certain GOP senators, I think, auditioning for a presidential run in 2024, testing out material like as a comedian would at a smaller club before playing a big club. Let's talk about child pornography. Let's talk about this. Nothing specifically about her record. And she has a long and impeccable list of credentials. Fortunately for her, with the composition of the Senate, 50 Democratic votes are assured. If there's a 50-50 tie, then Vice President Kamala Harris will cast a tie-breaking vote, and Judge Jackson will become Justice Jackson. But it shouldn't have come to that because, again, she has been confirmed by the full Senate for 2 previous positions, including her current position on the federal appeals court.
Yeah, you're so right. And she's got more trial judge experience than the entire Supreme Court combined.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
I mean, so come on now, like,
Yeah, no.
let's not be silly about this nomination and ask questions that are just foolish in
Yes.
my mind. But you know what? We'll see. History will tell that story, I'm sure. Now, let's get back to, to tennis. Tennis coaching costs are very high. That certainly presents an obstacle for poor families. What do you think that we can do to remove this elitist attitude that sometimes persists in the tennis community?
Well, Mike, I'd like to see more facilities like the XS Tennis Village in Chicago. I went to visit it on the South Side. Uh, Kamal Murray runs it. He coached Sloane Stephens to the US Open Championship in 2017. He's a Chicago native. And when a notorious housing project was raised, he looked at the vacant land and saw something nobody else could see. He saw a tennis oasis. He bought the land, had it converted into a 28-court tennis facility on the south side of Chicago. It is absolutely beautiful. It is near the highway. He's got families coming from the suburbs on the Dan Ryan Expressway coming into the tennis facility, and he's got children from the neighborhood, the south side, the north side, and they're getting top quality tennis instruction from a world-class coach. And he's Kamal Murray. They're charging a sliding scale. Basically, how much can you afford for the lessons? Not like these $85,000 a year tennis academies in Florida. That is totally out of reach for the vast majority of American families. So that's one reason, by the way, Mike, that no American man has won a Grand Slam singles title since 2003. We're not getting our best tennis players on the male side. We're getting the men who come from the families of financial means, who can afford to come up the traditional way. We're not doing it like other countries that pretty much subsidize you. If you show some promise at a young age, the Tennis Federation in France, for example, will subsidize you. And if you make it big, you give money back to the federation that is used for other young players, boys and girls on their way up. We don't do it that way. The Williams sisters, in many ways, are not a fluke, but the exception. Richard Williams had a vision. He attracted, Reebok to give Venus a lucrative contract that helped the family move out of Compton to Palm Beach, Florida, where they could play year round. So by the time Serena was ready, she was able to play on well-manicured courts in Florida every day, and the rest is history. But tennis is still out of the reach of far too many American families.
Yeah. Well, thank goodness for the vision that Richard had, because I think that set the stage certainly for other women to follow in the footsteps of Venus and Serena. But on the men's side, you're absolutely right. We got a lot of work to do. And the French model certainly makes a lot of sense to me. So hopefully we can adopt that sometime soon. I also wanted to talk to you about mental health, because here's another interesting segue that I think you can answer better than anybody. Simone Biles withdrew from the Olympics because she wanted to put her mental health first. And I agree with her. I think our mental health should come first. But do you think that was the right move, considering that she knew all too well the pressures of being an Olympic athlete?
I think Simone Biles put herself first. She put her body first. I think she did the right thing. She introduced a term that most people had never heard of before, the twisties. And people who are into gymnastics know what that means. If you don't trust what you're doing, you are just as likely to break your neck or paralyze yourself. You can't complete the routine if you don't trust yourself in the air. And because Simone did not trust herself in the air during the workouts in Tokyo, she removed herself from the competition. And I would say to people who criticize her, and too many people did, what if she had paralyzed herself? I think those people wouldn't even be talking about her now. They would have just moved on to something else. Simone put herself first. She put her mental health first. And I have even more respect for her now than I did when, she's the GOAT of gymnastics, but she's also caring and sensitive. And I think she set a fine example for athletes in other sports. If you don't feel mentally ready to compete, don't let anyone force you to do it.
Yeah. I mean, it certainly brought that conversation of mental health to the forefront. So for that, I'm very grateful. But why did that story with Simone Biles go viral? But then we heard so much less about Osaka's withdrawal from the French Open.
Now, I'll tell you, Mike, I think it's because the Olympics are bigger than the French Open. And I think more people were paying attention to the Olympics. Simone Biles is clearly the GOAT of her sport. Naomi Osaka at the time was not ranked world number one. I think what happened to Naomi Osaka should have received more attention. Don't get me wrong there, because she was essentially bullied out of the French Open. She went there. She said, I will agree to do the on-court interviews after the match, but I don't feel comfortable doing the group interviews. And I've been in many of those group interviews. Some reporters come there with an agenda. Some are hoping to ask the question that gets the athlete to react in a visceral way, whether it's anger or telling a joke or just saying something they may regret later. There was an incident last year before a tournament in Cincinnati when a reporter essentially asked Naomi, well, you don't seem to like us in the media, but you're famous because of us, which is too simplistic, really. And Naomi tried to explain what she was feeling, and she was having difficulty, and she left the press conference in tears. So in Naomi's case, I think tennis needs to do more for athletes like her, who I think have social anxiety disorder, and they're not comfortable in those big group settings. Perhaps let her talk to a pool reporter. That's what is done, let's say, in baseball. If there's a controversial decision involving the umpire, they never bring the umpire into the main interview room to be questioned by 50 reporters at once. They send in a pool reporter. And I think that would be a welcome compromise for players like Naomi who have anxiety issues in social settings. She's a brilliant player, but she's just not comfortable in those big group interviews where she doesn't know what they're going to ask her. She doesn't know who has an agenda, whether that agenda is positive or negative, and she would just as soon not deal with that at all. But when you're as great a player as she is, you do have to give the media something. It just shouldn't be the big mandatory press conferences in the big room. That's something that she's not comfortable with. And I think a lot more tennis players who haven't spoken up yet are also not comfortable with it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And that's a great suggestion that you made. But we come from a different generation than Naomi or Venus or Serena. So do you think that there's a generational divide when we talk about athletes and their mental health?
I do, unfortunately. I can recall a Texas politician being quoted as saying Simone Biles is a quitter. I've seen people call Naomi Osaka weak. And it just shows that just because other athletes of an earlier generation didn't have the choice, get out there and play. What are you talking about? That doesn't mean that was the right thing to do. That doesn't mean we should not listen to an athlete like Simone Biles, who is listening to her body and saying, I don't have confidence to make these twists and these vaults that I've become so famous for. I'm afraid I may hurt myself. Or Naomi Osaka, I'm not comfortable in these big group interviews. Let me talk to a pool reporter. At least that's my suggestion. People of an earlier generation will say, well, we didn't do that, but that doesn't mean you were doing it the right way. I think it's better to listen to young people. And if they don't feel the psychological safety to perform their jobs, we should find a way to let them do it on their own terms. We still get to benefit from the great talent of a Simone Biles or Naomi Osaka, but we're not forcing them to do something they're not comfortable with. And that's what I say older generations should take into consideration. They're not quitters. They're not weak. They are approaching this issue in a way that is different and I think healthier than earlier generations did.
Yeah, I'm with you. I agree with you 100%. I'm also a big Yankees fan. I love the homegrown Yankees, talking about Mariano Rivera and Derek Jeter and Jorge Posada. You wrote the book called The Yankees My Daddy, which is just great. That title has just made me laugh when I read it. Why do you think the Yankees were so dominant in the late 90s, but they've kind of struggled to get back to that spot in the 21st century?
You know, Mike, I think it's the difference between George Steinbrenner, the owner during the Yankees' heyday when they were the last dynasty in Major League Baseball, and his son, Hal Steinbrenner, who takes more of a bottom line approach. If we're making money, then it's all good. He did not go after the top free agents this year. He hasn't gone after the top free agents in past years, with the exception of signing the pitcher Garrett Cole a few years ago. But Carlos Correa, the best shortstop on the market, the Yankees didn't go after. Max Scherzer, the best pitcher on the market, who could have been a devastating 1-2 combination with Cole, they didn't go after him because the Yankees don't want to go above what baseball calls its luxury tax threshold. It's another name for a salary cap. If you spend more than, say, $220 million on players, you have to pay a luxury tax that is then given to the smaller franchises. So it's this curious situation, Mike. You follow the sport. The Yankees right now are not as good as the Tampa Bay Rays, who spend only a fraction of what the Yankees spend. So not only do the Rays beat the Yankees would end up paying the Rays for spending more than the luxury tax threshold. George Steinbrenner spent whatever he wanted to spend in the 90s to make the Yankees great. There's a reason they were the last dynasty in Major League Baseball. 3 consecutive championships, 1998 to 2000, 4 World Series victories in 6 years, 6 World Series appearances in 8 years. No other team has come close to that since, because there are more, I'll say, spendthrift owners today. And Hal Steinbrenner doesn't do business the way George Steinbrenner did. And I hear from more and more Yankee fans who are really upset with that, because we got used to having the best players in Yankee pinstripes, or at least the Yankees are in on the chase for the best players. Now they just sit it out and let those players go to other teams. And you know what, Mike? I think the new Mets owner, Steve Cohen, he's more like George Steinbrenner. I don't believe he'll be worried about going above the luxury tax threshold if he can make the Mets world champions.
Yeah, you're so right. And man, those were the heydays, those late 90s. I mean, those are the glory days in New York. Boy, was that fun. That was such a fun ride. I remember every minute of it. And you're so right. You're so accurate in saying that George Steinbrenner wanted to win at all costs. It was all about winning. It wasn't the bottom line that he was concerned with. He wanted to win and win every year, and he was going to do whatever it took to make that happen. And now you kind of see the differences when, you know, you have a father and then a son taking over the business. They have different approaches. They're different people, and they don't necessarily make the same decisions. So,
that's so true.
So fascinating. Oh man. And you also wrote Breaking the Ice, the Black experience in professional hockey. Talk to us about the professional struggles that have characterized the entry of African-American hockey players into really a mostly white sport.
Well, I started working on that book, Mike, when I was a beat writer covering the Carolina Hurricanes of the NHL for the News and Observer in Raleigh. I did a Sunday feature section on Blacks in hockey and used maybe 15% of all the material I had. So I said, I need to expand on this. And I eventually did. Went to the Hockey Hall of Fame Research Library in Toronto, interviewed a lot of hockey men. And an interesting thing that happened is one interview would lead to the next. A guy would say, oh, you need to talk to this fellow. You need to talk to that fellow. So suddenly I'm interviewing all these hockey men in their 70s and 80s and their 60s, and contemporary players as well. And to document the unique Black struggle in professional hockey, Willie O'Ree was the first Black player in hockey. He's known now as the Jackie Robinson of hockey. He was recently inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame. He debuted with the Boston Bruins in 1958. But in that book, I tell the story of Herb Carnegie, who should have been the Jackie Robinson of hockey back in 1948, when the New York Rangers offered him 3 opportunities to play in their minor league system. But Herb Carnegie was making more money playing basically semi-pro hockey in Canada. And in the 40s, there were no agents. I think if Herb Carnegie had an agent in the 40s, he could have helped him look at the big picture. Hey, you go to the New York Ranger organization, you have a chance to play your way into the NHL, become the Jackie Robinson of hockey. You'll get a lot of endorsement opportunities. People will never forget you because you would have done something historic. So, you know, for a few $1,000s more relatively, he stayed in semi-pro hockey in Canada. He never went to the NHL. And that's one major reason Herb Carnegie is not in the Hall of Fame and Willie O'Ree is.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, to be able to play, you know, with the New York Rangers, to be able to play in Madison Square Garden.
Yes.
I mean, what a difference, you know, that could have made You
Yeah.
think about all these things that have happened over history and how things could have been different had different decisions been made. But just fascinating stuff. I've
Yeah.
really enjoyed this interview, man. It takes me back. I could talk
It's
to you
been
for
great.
hours and hours. And we do love good food here at the Fraternity Food Podcast. I'm wondering, what's your favorite restaurant in Yonkers, so that way I can go and check it out the next time I'm in the city.
Well, I want to give you two places because I'm in Yonkers on the Westchester Bronx border. For Yonkers, there's a great pizzeria, Frank Pepe, on Central
Nice.
Park Avenue in Yonkers. Table service is not just a stand where you get your pizza and go. You can sit down and enjoy it and enjoy the friends and family. That's one place. But also in the North Bronx, there's a Jamaican restaurant I love called Cooler Runnings. It's a takeoff on that movie Cool Runnings about the Jamaican bobsled team.
Sure, of course.
But Cooler Runnings, great Caribbean food. I love the baked salmon with chili sauce. You can have traditional Caribbean beverages like ginger beer and sorrel. So I recommend both places, Cooler Runnings and Frank Pepe Pizzeria.
I'd be honored to have a meal with you at either place, your choice, because they're both phenomenal choices, and I would eat like a king at either place. So I love that. I think that's great. So if our listeners, if they want to buy your books, or maybe they want to connect with you, maybe for a speaking opportunity or something like that, where should they go to connect with you?
Well, I have a website. It's cecilharrisbooks.com. I'm also on Twitter as at Cecil H. Author. I'm on Facebook, author Cecil Harris. Those are the three best ways to go about it. The book is available wherever books are sold, as they say, Amazon.com, Barnes and Noble, Books A Million, all the major bookstore chains. They'll order it for you if it's not in stock, but I see it in all the bookstores, so it's still available. And I hope people will get different strokes because they can really find out the story of Blacks in tennis from the early 1900s to the present with the Williams sisters and also Althea Gibson, the first Black major tennis champion in the 1950s, and Arthur Ashe, the first Black male major tennis champion in the 1960s. I tell their stories in detail, and I think people will enjoy learning about them.
I love it. I think that's great. So for everybody that goes out to see King Richard in the movies, go and pick up Different Strokes, Serena Venus and the Unfinished Black Tennis Revolution. And I think that would be a very fitting 1-2 combination punch, as they say in boxing. I had a lot of fun. So I just want to say, Cecil, thank you so much for being on the show. This was probably more fun for me than maybe it was for you. But I really enjoyed it, and I know our listeners are going to love it. So to our listeners, if you like this interview with Cecil, please like it. Please share it with other sports fans that you know on social media. And what can I say, Cecil? Thank you for the great work that you're doing, man. I love your stories. I love your books. I'm a huge fan, so thank you.
Thank you, Mike, for inviting me. I did have a great time. It was fun. I'd love to talk with you again soon.
That sounds great. All right. Thanks so much to our listeners. We hope to see you on another episode of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. We'll see you next time.